Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being with us this evening. I am Abby Lee, and I am the Audience Engagement Coordinator at the Art Gallery of Windsor. And this evening, I'm going to be the moderator for our discussion. Before we get into our talk and what our amazing panelists have to say, I have a couple of things to go over. The first thing is our land acknowledgement. So with this event, we're fostering a lot of care, self-care and care of others. And that starts really with fostering care and respect over the land on which we have the privilege to live. And we want to care for the people whose land we live upon as well. So while this conversation and recording is happening digitally, today I want to acknowledge that I am physically situated on Anishinaabe territory, the traditional territory of the Three Fires Confederacy of First Nations comprised of the Ojibwe, the Ottawa, and the Potawatomi. Today, the Anishinaabe of the Three Fires Confederacy are represented by Walpole Island First Nation. I want to state my respect of the historical and ongoing authority of Walpole Island First Nation over its territory. Okay, so now that this has been said, and we want to keep this in mind both during the event and then after it has ended today. So now I'm going to go into a little bit of housekeeping before I hand it off to our wonderful speakers. So as you can see, this is a webinar. So for those who are in attendance, you have access to the chat function and Q&A at the bottom of the screen. We are going to have a Q&A in the last 15 or so minutes of our event. So once that comes up, please feel free to ask all of the questions that have been on your mind throughout the evening. You can feel free to use the chat throughout the event, but for the Q&A portion, if you don't mind using the Q&A tab specifically, it will be a lot easier to go through and get everyone's questions. And then also another thing, since we are going to be talking a lot about seeking help today, at the end of the talk, I'm going to be sharing some low cost and intersectional mental health resources, and that will be sent to your emails. I was going to send it in the chat. I thought that might be a bit distracting, so it's going to be sent once the event is done, either this evening or the day afterwards, just to kind of continue that conversation and that support network, again, even after this is finished. So now we are ready to get started with our lovely speakers. We have two speakers today from jack.org. This is an organization that is really close to my heart. It provides some incredible mental health resources for youth across the country. And with us today, we have Kat Kolobarek, president of jack.org Windsor chapter, as well as Stuart McHenry, who's the program coordinator for Southwestern and Niagara, Ontario at jack.org's headquarters. So I'm going to pass the mic to them and have them tell you a little bit more about jack.org, as well as some more about self-care and creative expressions. I'm going to hand it off and take it away, Stuart and Kat.
Great. I'll just get the slides queued up here, and then Kat can kind of lead us off.
Sounds good.
Before we get started, do one or two people maybe want to let us know in the chat if we can see the slides here, okay?
Looks like we're all good.
Looking good? Okay, awesome. Take it away, Kat.
All right. Thank you so much, Abby Lee, for that introduction, and good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us at this wonderful event put on by the Art Gallery of Windsor. My name is Kat, and I am a fourth-year student at the University of Windsor in the neuroscience program. I'm also a Jack Talk speaker and the president of our jack.org Windsor chapter. And my lovely partner in today's talk is Stuart, so I'll let him introduce himself.
Hello, everyone. Really excited to be here and share this space with so many artists. I'm not one myself, but I'm hoping I can learn lots from you today. So yeah, like Abby Lee and Kat said, my name is Stuart, and I'm program coordinator for jack.org. So I work specifically in Southwestern Ontario with our talk speakers, our chapters, and just like our general network of youth advocates in that area. So that's who I am, and yeah, really excited to share some of our tips and strategies on self-care with you today.
Okay, so some of you may already be aware of what jack.org does as an organization, but if you're not, you'll be learning a little bit more about us today. Jack.org is an incredible Canadian organization that provides youth with the tools and resources to be mental health advocates in their communities. Through its various initiatives, Jack.org fights the ever-present stigma around mental health and mental illness, addresses barriers, and works to provide accessible resources to all. I am so proud to be a part of this organization for almost 3 years now, and I can honestly say it has changed my life for the better. So as mentioned, today we will be talking about self-care with you and its incredible importance in the chaotic world that we're currently living in. We'll be briefly taking you through some foundational knowledge about mental health, being there for ourselves, particularly in creative ways, and who we can reach out to should we feel that we need to. So with every Jack Talk, we start off with these powerful statistics, and you can see them highlighted here. So 1 in 5 Canadians will experience mental illness in any given year. Only 1 in 4 will get the help that they need. And suicide is the #1 health-related cause of death for young people in Canada. Now, some of you may already be familiar with these statistics, but if you're not, you can see how impactful they really are because they show how mental health affects so much of the population and how incredibly relevant this issue is for young people especially. Statistics like these are why Jack.org fights the good fight by breaking down the stigma, encouraging accessibility to resources, and help-seeking actions.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that, Kat. And yeah, it really highlights why we're here having this conversation today. And yeah, I'm hoping you can all learn a little bit from us and we can learn some stuff from you as well. So before we get into kind of the tips, the strategies, the tools around self-care, figured it was just kind of important to make sure we're all on the same page with mental health, some of the background info there, and some of the factors that go into, impacting our mental health and our mental health outcomes. So I'll just start off with a basic definition around mental health, which as you see on the screen, is just a state of well-being kind of around our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. So although 1 in 5 people might struggle with a mental illness or be diagnosed with a mental illness, all of us have mental health. And at any point in our life, we can fall somewhere along this spectrum, from healthy to stress to struggling to in crisis. So when we're stressed, that's kind of when self-care really comes into play, to be actively applying it. And then as we move into struggle, into crisis, that's when we really need to reach out to those community supports and those crisis services. So yeah, mental illness, I think sometimes gets mixed up with mental health, but they actually are 2 distinct things, even though they are related. So mental illness is rather a cluster of mental health symptoms or a pattern of mental health symptoms. And like mental health, we can fall somewhere along this spectrum. So we could be someone diagnosed with a severe mental illness, maybe more moderate, or we could have no diagnosable mental illness. So again, it's a spectrum. It's not necessarily a black and white thing. But things really start to come together when we combine these 2 spectrums together. Again, we see that they're related, but they're different. And I really want to focus here on the top left corner and the bottom right corner of this dual spectrum. So in the top left corner, we could see that there may be someone who is diagnosed with a severe mental illness, but can actually still experience optimal mental health in their lifetime. And that would be in the case where, they've been diagnosed with something, but they're actually receiving the supports necessary to manage their symptoms. So whether that be medication, therapy, they have those social supports and that supportive circle around them to allow them to flourish. And I think this is especially important to name because a lot of those who I think live with mental illness are stigmatized, especially those who might be experiencing homelessness, those who are racialized, those who are low income are often, stigmatized and labeled as people who can't live healthy lives, who can't be contributing members of society, when in fact that's totally false. And if people are getting those supports and we have a supportive community around them, we can actually, create communities that allow people, regardless of mental illness, to thrive and be accepted and included in our society. And then on the other hand, on the bottom right corner here, you can actually have someone who's never been diagnosed with a mental illness, but actually really experience poor mental health throughout their lifetime. So, you might have someone say, oh, I'm not an anxious person. I don't need to look out for myself. I don't need to engage in self-care. I don't need to seek support when I need it. But that's actually not true, as just because you don't have a mental illness doesn't mean you can't struggle with your mental health, which is why it's so important for all of us, not just those living with a mental illness, to really develop those strategies and those tools to look out for ourselves and to look out for others. So hopefully that helps clear things up a little bit with mental health and mental illness and kind of how the two intersect. Okay, so quickly we'll kind of touch on this before we move into the self-care. So now we kind of know what mental health is, and we were talking about the spectrum, how we can progress from healthy to stress to struggling to in crisis. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about maybe what differentiates those like stages or areas of the spectrum. So for example, healthy is just like, we're feeling on top of things. Our day-to-day is pretty normal. We might have the normal negative thoughts pop into our mind, but overall, we're healthy, we're happy. Then we can get into stress where maybe, we have like a bunch of gigs coming up. We have all these like different commitments and we're overwhelmed, but it's not this like long lasting, super intense thing. It's kind of like the normal stress of a working life or whatnot. It's still really important to use self-care when we're stressed, but it's not what's going to constitute a mental health struggle, where a mental health struggle actually needs to kind of have these three key indicators for us to kind of officially consider it a mental health struggle. So are we having thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, negative thoughts, feelings, and behaviors that are intense, long lasting, and having a big impact? So these are the things we really want to look out for. So intense would be more kind of like, are these negative thoughts, feelings, and behaviors like really strong and they're in the front of our mind and we just can't get rid of them? Again, they're different than those normal everyday thoughts that pop into our mind. And then secondly, are these negative thoughts, feelings, and behaviors long lasting? So rather than it being a stressful week at work, maybe a stressful couple weeks at work, this like constant overwhelming negative thoughts and emotions, they're in our mind for 2, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, several months. That's when we can consider it long lasting and can consider it a mental health struggle. And then lastly, is it having a big impact on our lives? So are these thoughts, feelings, and behaviors causing us to not follow up with our commitments, maybe we're someone who's always on time for work and our commitments and we're not able to be on time, we're maybe lashing out a little bit at those around us. We're just not ourselves and it's having that big impact on our life. So again, we can understand when we're in a mental health struggle or when someone we know is in a mental health struggle, when they're experiencing negative thoughts, feelings, and behaviors that are intense, long lasting, and having a big impact on their daily lives. And then similar to a struggle, but much more intense, is a mental health crisis, where kind of all those things exist as above, except in a mental health crisis, the person who's experiencing a crisis is either at risk of harming themselves or harming those around them. So again, just wanted to kind of name this. And I think it's important to recognize these factors so that we know when we're struggling with our mental health and we know when those around us are struggling with their mental health, so we can direct them to that proper support. Cool. All right. And now the last thing I kind of want to dive into before we talk about self-care is just understanding a lot of the factors, maybe more micro and macro, that go into our mental health and something that can impact our mental health outcomes. So this is kind of, you've probably heard it before, is like the social determinants model of health, or the social determinants model of mental health. So I'll kind of start with ourselves in the middle. So this is more or less our identity, who we are, right? Our age, our gender, our race, sexual orientation, genetics, past experiences, all these things, they really impact how we interact with society and how society interacts with us. Again, this isn't something we can change, but something we need to acknowledge. Next, we move into our individual health behaviors, and this is more or less just kind of our attitudes around seeking help, our attitudes, are we someone who goes to the doctor when we're sick? Are we someone who goes to a therapist when we're struggling? All of these individual health behaviors are things that are a little bit more in our control, and something hopefully we can change if we are someone who might be struggling with our mental health. And we get a little bit kind of farther along in the circle here, and we move into our social support. So just what type of like social support do we have around us? Do we have supportive friends, family, colleagues? Do we just have those structures in place that allow us to get that support when we need it? Now we kind of get a lot bigger here as we move into living and working conditions. So our living and working conditions can have a massive impact on our mental health, right? If we're someone who has stable employment, access to safe housing, we're not experiencing food insecurity, that's likely going to have a positive impact on our mental health. Where on the other hand, if we're someone who's experiencing unemployment or precarious employment, someone who doesn't have even the basics, our communities are being denied access to clean drinking water, shelter, all of these things that can have a massive impact on our mental health. And again, these are kind of more massive or macro societal factors, but again, our living and working conditions play a huge role in our mental health outcomes. And then lastly is access to health services. So fairly self-explanatory, but do we have access to good health services, right? I think in COVID, we've heard a lot of bad stories about those who are Black, those who are Indigenous, experiencing a lot of discrimination as they seek and navigate the health system. Do we have services that are available in the language we speak? Do we have, are we able to access services free from discrimination? Do we have to drive an hour to access a therapist? Is there one around the corner? All of these things can play a huge role in our mental health. Again, if we have easy access to health services, we're much likely to experience positive mental health outcomes. And kind of as we bring things together here, there's like these real macro factors that go into kind of influencing the inner things in the circle. So we have like cultural norms and values. So for example, we live in a society of consumerism and individualism, and we have often this like grinded out culture, this hustle culture, where we're often not told to prioritize ourselves or prioritize our health. So a lot of these cultural norms and values can actually have a negative impact on our health behaviors and our social supports, or vice versa. If we live in a community that's supportive and kind of, encourages us to always look out for ourselves, that might have more of a positive mental health outcome. And then lastly, on the other side here, we have structures, laws, and policies that can have a massive impact on our ability to access health services and our living and working conditions, right? So what types of social programs do we have in place? Is systemic racism playing a major role? And obviously it is in our access to health services, in the types of employment certain groups are able to secure, all of these things. So can't really do this slide justice in a few minutes. We could probably talk about this stuff for an hour, but kind of just want to name all these factors for us to understand that mental health is really complex. There's a lot of things that go into it. And I think the more we can kind of understand and acknowledge these factors, the more we can look out for ourselves, and the more we can kind of target our advocacy and our activism to eliminate some of these barriers to positive mental health. So I'm hoping all this background info kind of gets us all on the same page as we move into more of like a strategic chat around self-care.
Okay, so thank you, Stuart, for taking us through that. Hopefully it was a nice little refresher for those of you that were a little bit more familiar with that information, but I also hope that those of you that were a little unfamiliar with it learned something new. So as he said, we'll now be getting into the more self-care portion of the talk. And we're going to start off with these 3 steps that Jack.org often encourages with relation to being there for ourselves. And they are: check in with yourself, do what you need to do, and seek help when you need it. And a huge part of why this is emphasized in Jack Talks and just in general by the Jack.org community is because we often forget to be there for ourselves. We're usually busy being there for other people, giving them all of our energy, and that usually leaves us feeling a little empty, a little burnt out, and a little exhausted. And it's so important to remember that we can't properly or effectively be there for others if we aren't taking care of ourselves first. And this all begins with checking in with yourself. So to start off this section, I want all of you to just pause for a moment, maybe take a deep breath, and give yourself some time to really think about how you've been practicing self-compassion lately. Make sure you're being honest with yourselves, and if you're comfortable, feel free to type a quick message in the chat about how you've been practicing self-compassion. Exercising, that's awesome. Moving your body, taking deep breaths throughout the workday, positive affirmations, reading. These are all awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. So, actively checking in with ourselves allows us to honestly acknowledge how these times have impacted us. And we can do this in various ways. So we can do it in a way that was similar to how I just asked you to do it. Or we can even use creative outlets. So things like sketching, songwriting, playwriting, collaging. It also gives us the opportunity to discover or maybe rediscover what feeling unwell looks like. And this may have changed throughout the last 10 months. Now, remember that everyone is different, especially with regards to the creative community. For some people, having this alone time might help them thrive creatively, while for others, their creativity might thrive more on having others around them. And then there can even be those people that might be feeling a combination of both of these things. This time has been really hard for everyone, and it has been particularly difficult on those artists and those in the live event industry. So for example, they've had to deal with canceled gigs, tours, exhibitions, and then trying to adapt to this new online environment, adapting live events to virtual settings, especially in quick turnaround periods. So I want to give you a concrete example of how we need to remember to practice self-compassion, because it's so easy to just in the moment forget. So let's say you've set a deadline for yourself and you've missed it, or you've been working on writing a play and it's not really coming together as you expected it to. We want to take a moment and not beat ourselves up about it, to not be cruel to ourselves, and ask ourselves if our friend was struggling with their deadlines or their writing, their painting, their drawing, etc., what would we tell them? And the answer would be most likely something compassionate. So important to remember that we deserve the same compassion, the same kindness, the same love that we so freely give to others. Now, going back to checking in with ourselves, this often means tuning into our inner voice and our self-talk. Now, sometimes self-talk is saying things like, oh, you're a creative genius, while other times it might be things like you should be in a different field or career, you're not good enough, etc. We don't want to be constantly critical, but we also don't want that unconditional positive self-regard, or UPS. And that is basically the basic acceptance and support of oneself, regardless of what we say or do. So for example, moving past your mistakes without actually acknowledging what went wrong, or telling yourself that you're awesome, you're the best, when you don't actually believe it. So we want to find a happy medium between those two, being constantly critical and the UPS. If we only have UPS, we miss out on that opportunity to grow as people and further our artistic practices. We actually like the critic within us. They help us grow and learn and evolve as human beings. We don't like the critic when it's detrimental to our well-being and does more harm than good. So this is a little meme that I'm sure most of you have seen or come across something similar in the last couple of months, especially during the beginning of the pandemic. And I know I was definitely one of those people trying to force myself to be productive in a time that was scary and changing constantly. So it's so important to remember that this is an experience that is new to essentially everyone in the entire world, and there is no right or wrong way to deal with it. We're also living in a completely different world, and we might even be completely different people. It's okay if the standard you hold yourself to has changed. It's all about breaking down our expectations of ourselves. So for example, as an artist, now with tons of time at home, there can be that pressure to constantly be creating and producing, and that shouldn't be the expectation. Again, we're in a different world. You've gone through a traumatic experience. We've all gone through a collective traumatic experience. And while that creation can be crucial for your self-care, rest is also very crucial as well. Now, this being said, as an artist who's possibly experiencing financial anxiety, lack of financial support, or other social factors, sometimes there isn't always that opportunity to rest. And in these moments and circumstances, it's so important to ask yourself, who can you reach out to that can help you with what you're working on, what your deadline is, what resources can you use to make you feel more supported, and it's also important to remember that just because you ask for help, that doesn't mean that you're weak. It doesn't make you any less prolific in your artistry. It actually allows you to connect with your community, and this can also spark creative excellence and help you feel more fulfilled.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Kat. And yeah, this kind of takes us into our next section, which is doing what we need to do, but we're really never able to do what we need to do unless we're taking that first step of checking in with ourselves, listening to our inner voice, listening to our bodies, and doing what we need. So just want to pose a couple questions again to the audience. I'm not going to be able to see the chat, so maybe if Kat or Abby Lee want to just like read out a few answers. I'll kind of combine these questions together. So how are you looking after your body's needs? So if your mind or your body is telling you something that needs to be done to take care of yourself, what are you doing? And then more specifically, what are some of your ways to build up your self-esteem? What are some of your favorite self-care activities? We'd love to hear about them in the chat.
We've got yoga, meditation, eating more fruits and veggies, Pilates, walking, bubble baths, watching movies,
Nice.
walking, weightlifting, audiobooks, lots of variety here.
Sweet. That's some good stuff. And yeah, they touch on, I guess, the kind of three themes that we talk about at jack.org of building up our self-esteem. And this is the 3 C's of building up our self-esteem. So the idea of the idea of competence, control, and community. So when we engage in activities or tasks that give us a sense of competence, that give us a sense of control, and that give us a sense of community, that's going to really have a positive impact on our self-esteem. Again, this might not be the be all end all, but I think the more we can incorporate these 3 C's into our self-care, the more likely we are to have positive self-esteem. So first I'll kind of dive into competence. And really it comes down to doing things that you're good at, right? One of the best ways to build up your self-esteem is to just engage in an activity we're good at. So maybe you're like a multidisciplinary artist who, is like kind of a jack of all trades in all sense, but your best is being a landscape painter. Okay, so maybe just spend an evening creating the most beautiful landscape painting that you're just so good at. And maybe it sounds like a little bit juvenile, but honestly, doing things that we're good at makes us feel so good about ourselves. And then the next C of the 3 C's is control. This isn't like some authoritarian thing where like being in control of everyone and everything makes you feel good. No, it's just like put yourself in situations and in circumstances where you kind of eliminate those variables, and you can kind of focus on only the things that you are able to control, right? So in this time, I'm sure we faced a lot of like canceled gigs. We kind of can't really do anything about all of our events being online as much as we hate it. Those are things we can't control. But things we can control are maybe using this time to, take another class to kind of become more of a creative genius, or teach a workshop. In any of these like things that we can control are going to have a massive impact on our self-esteem. So kind of just reasserting, again, let's focus on those things we can control, stay away from those that we can't, and that's going to have a positive impact on us. And then lastly is community. And I think this one's pretty self-explanatory. In a time of isolation, it's just like having that community to be able to connect with is going to have such a positive impact on our mental health. So whether that be like joining, using social media to find different creative groups, subscribing to like your favorite community organization's newsletter, joining amazing events like these where you're around like-minded artists. Like for me, being around like-minded people and talking about politics and like all of these things really makes me so happy. I'm like a huge Raptors fan, and I love going on Twitter because there's like Raptors Twitter where like every time there's a Raptors game on, there's like all these people talking about the Raptors, and it just gives me that sense of community in these very isolating times. So again, not the be all end all, and I'm not saying you do these things and you're going to be perfectly mentally healthy, but I think the more we can incorporate activities that make us feel competent, that make us feel in control, and that give us that sense of community, the more we're going to see, positive self-esteem in ourselves. So as we kind of wind things down here and move into the panel section of tonight, just wanted to pose a few questions, and no need to share in the chat. But I think it's really important to ask ourselves these questions. First of all, how open are we to reaching out for help? And if we aren't open to reaching out for help, what are some of the things that are stopping us? And then secondly, kind of who can we talk to if we're struggling, right? When we're struggling, it's often really hard to have the whereabouts to know where to go. So if we're able to write down 2 or 3 people or places we were going to go if we're struggling, that could be super, super helpful for when we do find ourselves in a mental health struggle. And again, I just think this is really important because although we're talking about self-care, sometimes the biggest aspect of self-care is knowing when we need that extra support. So it's really, really important for us to seek that help when we need it. And that's kind of the third piece of our self-care framework. So I just wanted to finish off with this slide here with all of our community resources. I think they're all popping up now. So Abby Lee, like she mentioned, is going to share that list with everyone through their email. But I just wanted to put some of them up here as well, just so you could see them. But all these are listed on that sheet. She'll be sharing along with their numbers, contact info, and all that. So all that to say, there's so many different resources out there, and often when you're seeking help, for your struggle, it's not always going to go the greatest the first time. You're going to have to try different places. Maybe psychotherapy works for some. We're talking to a social worker works for other. Maybe an anonymous helpline is nice for some people. Maybe even texting, right? Like sometimes it's hard to pick up that phone and verbally talk to someone when we're struggling. So, like Kat said, no problem is too big or too small. You're all deserving of help, and just never give up when you are seeking that help. It might take a little while to find what works for you, but just make sure you see it through until you get the help you need. So that's pretty much it for me. Just wanted to thank everyone for listening to me talk quite a lot, and I'll just pass it back to Kat before we wrap things up.
All right, so that brings us to the end of our talk. Just to give you a brief recap of the 3 steps of being there for yourself. They are, again, check in with yourself, do what you need to do, and seek help when you need it. And we really hope that you'll implement the tools that we discussed today, however and whenever you may need them in your daily lives. Just continue to take care of yourselves in any way, shape, or form that works for you. Especially as these times around us continue to change constantly. But again, just a huge thank you for having us here tonight. I know I'm always so honored to when I'm asked to speak somewhere. I know Stuart is as well. So thank you so much. I hope you learned something, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the presentation.
Thank you so much for starting the event off with this talk. I feel like every time that I hear it as well, I still learn something new. I've heard the Jack talks a couple of times, but again, every time there's something new to be discovered. So I really appreciate you for coming out and for delivering that talk. So with that, we're going to move into the second portion of our event. Kat, I know, has to depart, so please feel free to depart whenever you would like, because I know you have something after this, but the rest of our panelists will be staying here and having a conversation. So I'm just going to start off by saying we're so happy to have first all the attendees, also all of these amazing panelists with us today. So I'm going to call everyone's name in my own Zoom screen's order. And if you could just give a little introduction on yourself, just to let all of our attendees know your background and kind of what perspectives you're coming in with, that would be great. So I'll start off with Stuart.
Yes. So I'm from jack.org, as previously mentioned. So I work with a lot of youth advocates who kind of take action on mental health in their community. So I don't come from a clinical background, I guess, of mental health, but I kind of just speak to my experiences working with a lot of young people who are involved in the mental health field and mental health advocacy.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We're going to go to Leslie next.
I am Leslie Mccurdy. I'm a solo performing artist of plays about Black women from history, and I'm a social activist and I'm also somewhat of a floundering performer right now with all of the changes going on. So this is a really good talk for me because I'm really getting some valuable things out of it that I need to remind myself as well. So thank you.
Oh my gosh, well, thank you so much for being here. And Leslie is also at a previous panel that we had and was amazing. So we're so happy to have her back. Next, we're going to go to Kim.
Hi everyone, I'm Kim Willis. I'm the Director of Communications and Mental Health Promotion at the Canadian Mental Health Association. I work closely with Jenny Lee Almeida, who's also part of the panel. And in 2017, we founded the Soul Focused Project, which is all about education, addressing stigma, suicide prevention. And it's been a great initiative for us and for the community. And we've been able to touch a lot of people with information similar to what Jack.org shared earlier. So it's a great thing for the community to be part of, and has really put CMHA in the position to be known to come to when you're struggling with your mental health needs.
Great. Thank you so much, Kim, for introducing yourself and for being here. I'm going to go next to Eric.
Hey, everybody. My name is Eric, Eric Johnson. My stage name is E-Tonic. I am a poet, lyricist, vocalist, and short fiction writer. And I'm also the current Windsor Poetry Slam Grand Champion. And yeah, that's about it right now.
Thank you so much. And last, definitely not least, though, we're going to go to Jenny Lee.
Hi, it's so nice to meet everyone and get to know a little bit of everyone. Lived experience. So I think that I went into the mental health field really just wanting to know why am I the way I am? And long story short, it's telling your story. It's advocating, it's breaking that stigma, whether you have clinical professional experience, whether you have experience from the school of life, and don't we all, right? I just want to, I think we have to congratulate ourselves. I think we are not giving ourselves a warm pat on the back. We have gone through a lot. We have increased our resilience. Our resiliency tank, we have adapted, we're readapting, we're rejigging, we are surviving, and we are keeping our connections in whichever way we are able to do that. So it's pretty cool. I think that we have to, we got to stop and also just say, whoa, I've done a lot this year, and I gotta give myself some love and some props, right? So there we go.
Oh my gosh, I was just taken in completely by your lovely words. I'm like, oh yes, now I must unmute myself and go to the next portion. But thank you so much for the introductions and for that statement, Jenny Lee. I think it's so important to remember that, especially with all of the blaring accomplishments we often see. I find especially on LinkedIn and Instagram, it can feel hard if we're not feeling that way. So it's really important, just as you said, to ensure that you're meeting yourself where you're at, wherever that place is in your own journey. So kind of segueing from that, the first question I'd love to point towards Stuart, Kim, and Jenny Lee, so our kind of mental health advocates, as I'll be mentioning this evening. So a lot of the time we hear the term self-care, it's kind of become like a buzzword in our lives, and it's also kind of become synonymous with that treat yourself feeling of like going out and buying a lot of things or engaging in behaviors that are kind of indulgent, which, like, don't get me wrong, I'm all about like indulgent things like eating cake and bubble baths and all of that good stuff. But I'm wondering, from your perspectives, does this miss any really important aspects of self-care? Like, how would you define like true, in-depth, meaningful self-care that's going to have like a long-lasting effect for people?
I think I'll start. I'll unmute myself real quick. And right away, when I saw the question beforehand, I thought, okay, I'm going to research this. I'll get like the clinical definition. And then I just thought, whoa, back up. And I'm going to I'm going to give a shout out to a colleague of mine, wealth of experience and knowledge, and self-preservation. Let's go back to the basics. And I think that right now, amidst so much uncertainty, we have to really focus in on what we're able to control, asking ourselves 3 basic questions. Did I sleep? Have I hydrated myself? Have I fueled my body? And our bodies crave movement. So whatever you want to create within yourself, a mantra, self-care, self-preservation, self-restoration, rest, it doesn't matter. Do you get to know yourself and figure out what are key components that make me feel better? Get to know yourself. I'll stop. I'm going to stop.
Guess I can hop in next. So yeah, that was really well said. And something I would like to add, and it kind of touches on what was mentioned there, is just like quote that stuck with me a while ago from one of my colleagues as well, was like, self-care I think is often like only thought as doing the easy thing, where like self-care also needs to be doing the really hard thing, right? Like sometimes when we're feeling so down on ourselves, like a messy house or a messy room like might be something that like is something that's causing us a lot of stress, right? And like I don't ever want to clean my room, but I recognize that when I clean my house, I don't like it while I'm doing it, but when it's done, I'm like, wow, I feel a lot better about myself. So I think doing the hard thing is important too, and like because often we only think of doing the easy thing. Although I do really love the easy thing, especially when I'm like overwhelmed and stressed. I think I love just like cracking open a beer and a bag of chips and watching the Raptors. That's like one of my favorite things as well. But I think self-care is a combination, right, of those easy things, of the bubble baths, the chips, but also the hard things of like, you know, getting things together when things not being together is what's causing me a lot of stress and a lot of struggle. So
and I would just add to Stuart and Jenny that it's fluid, I think, too, right? That the way you're feeling one week might mean self-care is a walk or exercise, whereas the next week, I know that I'm feeling that loneliness or isolation. I need to make a point of having some connections with some other people, even though that might be an extra work. So I think it's very fluid depending on what's going on in your life at that particular time. But I think most importantly is just acknowledging it and making time and making it a priority, whether that's daily or weekly or whatever. Hopefully it's daily, but just making that a priority.
Well, thank you so much for those answers. Like, I love all of the things that you were mentioning. I feel like in terms of what all of you said, it really does come back to balance, and how sometimes the way we see self-care in the media, or kind of how it's described more mainstream, it's not quite as in balance as what you've talked about. It's a lot of just kind of one type of, or one set of behaviors, and sometimes that set that is described is often targeted towards one particular demographic, isn't always inclusive of everyone. So not everyone's going to think that self-care is for them, but from the framework that you just described, that can be something that's really applied widely to people from so many different experiences. So I think that's really important, along with all of the wonderful things that you had just said. So now I'd love to turn to our artists in the room, so Eric and Leslie, now that we've got a bit of a basis in self-care as we've defined it this evening. And I can say as someone who's worked in the arts industry too, like definitely felt and seen that the balance is hard, because working in the arts can be more of a lifestyle than a job a lot of the time. You're always hustling, like trying to get 20 different things together, but you're only one person, so you're trying to juggle all of these things. And especially right now, in these times of COVID, like circumstances obviously are very uncertain for folks in the arts and in live events. So with all of this in mind, is your sort of idea of self-care similar to what was just described, different than what was described? And I'd also love to, I'm throwing all the questions at you, but I'd love to hear about what kind of practices factor into your self-care, because I'd imagine if you are in the creative field, maybe for a break, maybe you don't want to create, or maybe you do. So I'd love to kind of hear what your own idea of self-care looks like.
I guess I'll jump in. I don't know. Wow, I saw that line in there. It said, it's not that you don't have time, you're not disciplined. And I cross my arms because I'm constantly fussing at myself for not doing anything. I'm trying to forgive myself for not being the Wonder Woman that I think I should be. Because I feel like you see so much online about so many people that are being so incredibly creative. And I did have a project in mind that I wanted to do. I was going to write a new one-woman play, sort of an autobiographical, social, political commentary type of piece that I was going to introduce for my birthday this year and throw a big party, because I throw a party for myself every 12 years. But when everything shut down, that was like, kind of ended. And I mean, I do find that sometimes, just to help myself, I write things, just little things from time to time on loose pieces of paper, just thoughts and feelings and whatnot. But mostly I find I just have to forgive myself for not trying to, be wonderful. I try to take the focus off of myself by doing things for other people. For years, I've volunteered for Meals on Wheels, so I do that. But I also helped to organize a new social, sort of a political organization here in Windsor that I've devoted a lot of time to working on to keep the focus off the fact that I'm not being creative. Outside of an actor, I'm also a dancer. So I try to dance, give myself dance class and all the time. And for a while that was even difficult, but because the dance company that I dance with for mature dancers folded because of COVID. So that's been something else I've had to deal with. Like, there's been so much change because of all this, and then I'm sitting at home thinking about all of this when normally now I would be on the road. And I actually posted something on Facebook just to let some of that out of me, because I found myself walking around sort of lost last week. And after about 3 days, I realized, oh my gosh, I'm here. I shouldn't be here. So that was another thing. So I find myself watching a lot of TV, but at the moment I'm supposed to watch a lot of TV because I'm judging something, but that makes me feel lazy. So I'm trying to forgive myself for doing that part of my job. But, it's been a difficult time. I try and do, like Jenny Lee said, I drink lots of water, make sure I'm hydrated every day. I try to make sure I'm eating the right foods. I try and make sure that, I'm grateful and giving thanks all the time, just for the very fact that I'm here to have to go, deal with everything. Because, I just say, like, I'm here. Thank you for the day. Whatever I have to deal with, it's a blessing, because some people don't wake up in the morning. So those are the kinds of things that I try and keep in mind and practice to keep myself stable. But I'll be truthful. There are some times when I'm just a little freaked out because, I'm not a young person anymore, and change at this time in my life is not something that I had anticipated. At this time, I had prepared myself to change, what I was doing in a few years, but now it might be forced upon me, and I'm still just trying to grapple with that and accept that, and accept myself in the possibility of that, new world of being normal and not a traveling artist anymore. So I don't know.
I guess that's my cue. For me, yeah, I found that I need to kind of take it easy on myself, just like Leslie was saying, not being too hard on myself, finding that balance between being creative and just kind of taking things as they come. But I try to, when I'm not being creative in one way, I try to be creative in some other way, or at least if I'm not being creative, try to be productive. So I've tried to join, new social groups, of course, online. Let's see, I try to, like I said, when I'm not being creative in one way. So I mentioned earlier that I write short fiction. So sometimes I'll just sit with my phone and I'll scribble like a short story. I'll just type out a short story that actually have one or two that I'm working on at the moment. Or I try to practice the old poems that I always wanted to get back to. Or always try to be learning something, keeping my mind active, because just like Leslie said, like we're sitting around, we're watching TV, even if we're supposed to be doing it, like she's supposed to be doing it, it still makes you feel lazy. Or you see all these stories of people being so creative and productive, and you got to remind yourself to not, don't be so hard on yourself. I mean, you didn't face this, you've never faced this before, nobody else has faced this before. So just take it, I try to take it every, one day at a time, take things as they come. Focus on being productive, if not creative. Stay, one of the things I will fully admit, I was terrible for not drinking enough water. I've been drinking plenty of water lately. Focusing on just my overall health. And I think when the body is healthy, it's easier to focus on making the mind healthy. And when the mind is healthy and they're working together, you're overall a healthier person. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much again for sharing so candidly. I think you've said again some really important things. I really wanted to kind of touch on what you're saying of, again, seeing other people out there, especially on social media, being so productive, and how that can be hard if you're not feeling in that space. And it reminded me of this great line I saw a couple of years ago. There's at my old school, Queen's University, they have this peer support center, and it's just like one of the best places on earth, kind, non-judgmental, supportive, wonderful. And they put something out, and I hope this doesn't come off like cliche, because to me it really hit me in the moment. So I hope it does for some folks who are watching as well. And it was that, we see our entire reel of life, but on social media you only see people's highlight reels. So people might be posting a snippet, but that's kind of our whole conception of what's been going on in their life, when really they have a whole reel that we haven't actually seen. So I think that's important to keep in mind. Obviously, we'd love it if we were all just in that highlight reel space, but we're all fluctuating. It's a non-linear path, especially during these really unprecedented times, and that's okay. Also, I'd love to say with the with Leslie, and you're speaking to feeling like need to be that Wonder Woman. I think it's like, for me anyway, when I see people like putting themselves first and doing what they need to do, I'm like, that is I see those people as like wonder people, I'll say, for all of our gender identities out there. Like, I think that can be a really wonderful thing, as well as being really productive and being really strong, because if you see other people giving themselves permission to take care of themselves and do what they need to do, then that inherently gives other people permission, and it's just like a domino effect of wellness. So going into kind of our next portion, I'd love to bring in perspective from the arts world and mental health. This one's going to go to Leslie and Stuart. Again, this is our current reality, COVID times, boxes on screens still. I think it's really important, again, to hear from your perspectives. Like, do you think it's still possible, even with everything going on, to achieve the same sort of like meaningful self-care that we would have before this time? And like, how do we go about doing that?
I guess since I'm a solo artist, I'm used to spending a lot of time by myself anyways, traveling and doing things. So I already have some practices that I would, take with me on the road that I've been trying to maintain even while I'm at home, just to try to keep that consistent. And, that would be like trying to make sure that I'm working out properly, making sure that I spend some time to breathe. I'm a deep believer in like deep breathing, just to keep my, myself calm and everything. And truth be told, I'm getting a whole lot more sleep than usual. And that's probably a good thing too. So, that's what I'm trying to do. But I don't know, again, it's just, like you said, we're in weird times, and trying to just accept that and adapt to that without being judgmental is my biggest practice, my mantra, I guess. It's like, take it easy, take it easy, take it easy. So, that's the work that I'm trying to do.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for sharing. And some of the things you're touching on with your last point too reminded me of this. Saw this video one time of like radical self-care, where like in a world where it's so individualistic and like consumerism all the time, like it actually is a radical act for us to take care of ourselves. And I think, let's all be radical and actively incorporate that self-care into our lives. But yeah, one thing for me, and I think this is maybe like more kind of my style, but there's kind of the other side of it, where I found when like, I guess normal times or pre-COVID times, I didn't have to be as active about my self-care, because I was someone who like really thrived off of like separation of work and home, and just like spontaneous events of, friends hanging out, and the plans kind of just fall into place, where it's like, now I'm stuck in my like small apartment in Toronto, and this is where I work and this is where I live, and I have all this time, and I find that I'm like often way more anxious than I normally would. And I'm like, now just having to be really strategic about, like, at the end of the day, I now leave the condo for a half an hour walk just to like escape from work, or like I'm like strategically incorporating that into my life, where I felt like when I had that separation of work and home, it was much easier to get away and to decompress and to do all those things that were necessary for self-care. So yeah, I think that you can definitely still take care of yourself during these times. I think you just need to be a lot more strategic and intentional about it.
Yeah, thank you for speaking to those strategies too. I think that probably lands for a lot of people who have seen a lot of their own walls as of late, and not a lot of other things, especially with, again, the kind of with the newer restrictions. I think everyone's going to be staying home again a little bit more. Again, apologies if you can hear my clock ringing in the background right now, but back to kind of what you were saying in terms of making the self-care really intentional, especially during this time. I think that's so important, because I know I've really been feeling as well kind of the difficulty of balance when so much of our work time and our self-care time, it's taking place in like through the same medium. A lot of the time it's taking place through our computers, our phones, our technology. So trying to be mindful of just, yeah, giving our eyes a break can even be in this time, I think, such a powerful form of self-care, like sitting by a window while you're working so you can look outside and look at a tree, or just get some kind of natural light. I know it's been pretty cloudy in Windsor-Essex lately, so just trying to get that light wherever you can. Even that right now can be something that, again, like you mentioned earlier in the talk, Stuart, it's not going to, quote unquote, fix everything that's impossible, but it may make things a little bit, you might feel a little more fulfilled, like your cup has been filled up a little bit, which is great. So now I'm going to kind of bring it back to some of our mental health advocates again. So this one's going to go to Jenny, Lee, and Stuart. And this, I think, really touches on what you were mentioning at the beginning, Jenny Lee, of just trying to make sure that your basic needs are fulfilled, that you're really listening to your body. Because I saw this post and I was like, this is so, to me, it seemed so radical, because usually we're seeing like these like bright, pops of color and like self-care, go to this yoga, like super expensive, like mindfulness retreat and buy this stuff and da. But when I was looking on social media, this one was saying like, hey, if you're having trouble getting out of bed, just like put leave-in conditioner in your hair. Like if you don't feel like going outside, open up your blinds so you can get a bit of natural light. So I'm wondering with both of you, if for someone who isn't struggling, their routines would probably look different than what I just mentioned about the very small self-care strategies. And sometimes checking in with where you're at can be hard. Like sometimes you're not sure if you know, once you get out of bed, oh, that's actually going to be better for me and I'll feel better. Or, oh, should I just be staying in bed because I've been doing so many things and I need to rest? How can we kind of figure out what level of self-care that we need?
It's a really awesome question. And I think it's so again, our mental health is really based on our own personal experiences and perspective. And the best thing that I, as an advocate, you know, especially with a lived experience, can tell anyone else is it's meeting yourself where you're at, getting to know, asking yourself that question, like, what do I need today, right? And it's going to vary depending on what your current experience is, and nobody understands what you are experiencing, right, except for yourself. And it's that self-awareness piece. I mean, I don't know, I call it my your intuition, our spidey sense. You know, for probably 30 years of my life, I have tried to run away from it because I'm like, ooh, that's anxiety, I want to go. Now I'm like intentionally leaning in, and I am trying to make stress my friend. So I'm trying to lean into those moments of discomfort, ask myself some questions of like, why am I feeling this? Why? I don't like it, but why am I feeling it? And what can I do in that moment? I don't know.
Yeah, that's really well put, and it kind of reminds me. I'll go back to the talk at the beginning, and we were talking about the mental health spectrum and kind of how we can fluctuate from healthy to stress, to struggling to in crisis. I think just like the more familiar we can kind of be with those stages, I think that'll play a big role. Like what works when I'm stressed, and what do I need to do? And that's when this has been happening now for 3 weeks, and I can consider myself in a mental health struggle. I think that's big. And then another thing I think again is like not thinking of self-care as like medicine, but thinking it as like a tool belt, right? And like I think the longer we go through our mental health journeys, kind of the more tools we pick up, and we have those different screwdrivers to fit into the different nails or the different screws, right? Like the longer we go through this journey, although it might be something that's been really tough, it also gives us that learning experience to draw on different things, right? When I'm feeling this, I go to my tool belt and grab this tool. Whereas when I'm feeling that, I go to my tool belt and I grab that tool. So I think like, yeah, it's not like an answer that's going to solve everything, but I think the more that we're able to check in with ourselves and the more we experience, just the more experience we have, the more we're able to draw from our tool belt and build our tool belt of self-care.
And I want to just stop it. I want to pop in real quick, Stuart. I'm going to piggyback on what you just said. I think that, I have to say this, where we're talking a lot about the self-care, self-preservation, and social connections. Eric and Leslie, every single one of us, we've all discussed how we're trying to find connections. And I think that us human beings, we are made to be connected. So whatever modalities we're trying to find that, and we're leaning in towards that, I'm going to encourage it. Like I'm going to tell people, keep trying whatever online group, Zoom, any events, and you're going to find something. And when you do, you're going to feel it and just get to know those feelings and pick up on the good vibes because you want those good vibes.
Yes, completely. And having those vibes that are good, but then also that just feel like you and that allow you to be yourself in that space and feel accepted. So important. And this again is kind of going off of what Stuart and Kat had said in the talk at the beginning of this, but I love what you were saying too, Jenny Lee, of, just try many different things. Like if you don't find something that is a good fit for you right off the bat, that doesn't mean that there's nothing out there. Like there's so many different resources that do exist, and sometimes it takes a lot of trying. Like I know for myself in my own mental health journey, like trying to find a counselor that was good took several different tries. It took about 3 or 4 different tries before I found someone that did fit for me. And if you find something like a community group or support system that's good for you right off the bat, then amazing. And that's that would be great. But if it does take some more time, like there are many different things out there that are accessible too. So it's all just about learning exactly what you need and how that might be different than sometimes what you're being told that you need from external sources. So now I'd love to turn to kind of a blend of our artist mental health advocates in the room. So this one's going to Eric, Leslie, and Kim. I have personally found, again, one of the more silver lining moments of this time is just seeing the amount of people who have realized how much they appreciate the art and culture during this time of distancing. Like I haven't seen so many people ever post about like, oh, I'm doing this and getting creative, or like people just doing really interesting things to be connected, even if they like creative things to be connected as well, even if they aren't necessarily quote unquote artists as a career or anything like that. So I'd love to hear, like, how have you seen people in maybe in your lives and your work use creative practices to take care of themselves?
Well, I guess I'll take it first. I have a number of people that I know, that I connect with online, whether they're friends, family, colleagues, whatnot. I've seen them take up, playing guitar, playing keyboard or piano, get into, doing poetry or hip hop, some form of artistic expression. It's been really, really awesome to see. And they use, and I've seen a lot of people use it as a platform, to reach out and talk about how they're dealing with this whole COVID experience, and I've seen people use it to find that balance between being productive and creative, and just keep themselves uplifted, and and just finding that thing that gives them joy, even if it's a new thing, even if it's not something that they plan on doing as a career. I've been thrilled to see how people are using it to connect, and I've seen a lot of people, even on just like my own personal Facebook, people post. I see, I comment on different people's videos, and just through that, people creating different connections and whatnot. It's been really, really great to see.
I think that one of the cool things has been seeing the innovation pieces too from people in the arts. So I think of WIF, that the film festival that people love to go to, and unfortunately it couldn't happen as we know, but they brought the drive-in back this past summer, and it was hugely successful. And I think it was an opportunity for people to come together and have that sense of connection, that shared experience that is such a big part of enjoying a play or a concert or a movie. And then, having just that experience with others around you. So I think it's been really fascinating to see the innovation happening in such really a short span of time.
Yeah, I'm trying to catch up with the innovation piece of all of this, because so much is online, and actually I'm pretty technically illiterate when it comes to online stuff, but I'm learning, and I see other people around me learning. The innovation is really incredible, and I'm and particularly for my work, the interest in all things Black is really nice because people are sort of paying attention, and more Black art, more Black authors are being recognized, you know. So that's a nice piece of this, although it came from tragic circumstances, and will continue to be tragic circumstances that are making that happen. But yeah, I noticed that people are trying different things. People are writing music and trying documentary films, and you know, various ways of trying to communicate through the arts, and they may not have before. I led a movement workshop through the Arts Council, and a lot of people were interested in that and wanted me to continue in some way because they'd like to try and get more movement into their lives. So I'm always glad when people are trying to move more with their bodies, because I think our bodies are fabulous pieces of machinery. So that's what I've observed so far. But yeah, one thing that I always keep in mind though is there is a lot of suppressed creative energy right now. And that 100 years ago, following the pandemic, we had the period known as the Roaring 20s. And so I personally am looking forward to the Roaring 20s Take Two, that I am really hopeful is going to manifest after all of this time, when we are all sort of stuck into our, you know, keeping to ourselves, you know, mandated to be by ourselves, and maybe not being, some of us, as creative as we want to be because of the stresses and everything of it. When that's, you know, alleviated, I'm looking forward to, you know, being able to take flight again, you know. So I'm hopeful that that will also manifest for other artists that are having difficulties being creative at the moment.
Roaring 20s Part 2. I love it. I hope we see some kind of just excitement and connection in person, like when it is safe to do so. I think we're all really looking forward to that time. And Kim, I love that you brought up WIF, because for me, I remember at the beginning of all of this, when there was talks about drive-in movies coming back, I'm like, oh, I wonder if that's going to really start happening with a lot of the different theaters and film festivals. And then it really did. And I thought that was a really, again, a really creative mode of connection, like even just sitting in a space with other people, even if you're not right next to each other, but you're in your own separate cars, like that can just foster so much connection in and of itself, I think. So thank you for sharing those excellent creative ideas. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I think just adding on to that, I heard the other day some film critics talking, and they actually said that one of the things they hope stays post-COVID is that for film festivals, they've had to open up like their box office to people across the world, if you're so inclined, and just how much more accessible that is. And again, and that's innovation, that it's something that's been adapted and learned through this, but it's one thing, you know, that might be kind of nice to keep, same as the drive-in, right? Like, I think there are some things through this that we've learned, and some things that we could keep in that support our self-care and our self-preservation and our creativity.
I'd like to add to that also, if I may, because Bookfest Windsor was online this year, and I was able to attend much more of the sessions online than I would have if I had been going to them in person. So there has been more accessibility in some ways, like Kim is saying, of the arts because of this online format and because of the time that we have to engage in it.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, even the folks that were with us today, we saw some different folks coming to us from Detroit, Montreal, Toronto, which that probably wouldn't have been possible if this was in person. So we're very happy to have all of you, and glad that this can be more accessible, and I'd love to see that accessibility continue even after we can gather in person again. So just seeing the time here, I'd love to open up to some audience attendee questions. So if you had anything that you'd really like to ask all of the panelists today, some of them, or just kind of have an open question, please feel free to use the Q&A tab. This will be at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and I will keep an eye on it to see the questions coming in, and we'll make sure that they go to the right folks. So yes, the floor is yours. I'll just give a little bit of pause to let folks write in any questions that they have. Yes, go for it. Give us your thoughts.
Could I ask Leslie a question? Leslie, your movement class, is this something that I'm like, so I had 4 points that I wanted to mention, and one has to do with movement. So what I've been leaning in and being more intentional is there's not too much in my world that we're able to control. And I know that when we start getting lost in that future, we're not able to control. That's when the uncertainty starts to creep up, right? And the anxiety and feeling overwhelmed. So be intentional with your routine. I loved how Leslie said that she's incorporated a lot of her, transitions that self-care strategies that she had out when you were out in the road and incorporating it within your day-to-day. So incorporating predictability, wake yourself up at 8 in the morning, just every day, or go to bed at 11 or 10. Having a routine, even if it's having your coffee at the same time every day, calling a friend, checking in online, whatever it is, predictability, routine, and those transitions to and from work. Stuart mentioned being able to leave your condo after work and walk for 30 minutes, being able to identify some of those routines that we've been stripped away from. We need to kind of put it back in our everyday. So trying to incorporate those awesome go-to strategies that we had a year ago, now we need to readapt them and blend them into our current. And that's going to keep us grounded, right? A little bit. Don't ever reach out for help. And Leslie, I really want your movement because we need to keep active mobility.
Yes.
So if you have ongoing classes, please let us know.
Yes, well, I was going to say we have someone in the chat, Mandy, asking if Leslie would be willing to do the movement class online. And Mandy would love to know what it's about and what it looks like.
Actually, I would love to do the classes online because that would, well, here I go back to that discipline thing, but that would keep me disciplined about, being creative with movement. Because when I do technique, I do stuff I've been doing for 30 years. But the movement class that I did was about incorporating breath with movement, and everybody just doing a movement in their own rhythm to their own breath. I do, gentle warm up with the body, and then just some creative things, just with movement. So everybody can move their bodies in their own ways to music with their own breath is how it worked out. And yeah, I guess I could try and do something like that online. I'm not exactly sure how to set it up, but I can sure try. And if I do so, I'll let it be known. I can let Haley know and she can put the word out to everybody. But yeah, maybe on Saturday afternoons or something, I could do something if that's, it's hard to find what's a good time for people to join, because I was teaching a dance class when the COVID first hit with some actors that I worked with Arts Collective Theater. And that lasted through the summer, but then everybody went back to school and schedules all changed. So that sort of faded away. And it's really finding the time when enough people can come to have the critical mass to make it worthwhile. But I mean, maybe I'll throw something out there for Saturday afternoon and see what happens. But thank you. Thank you for asking about that. Because yeah, it's something I would enjoy doing. I love teaching and I love moving. So they go hand in hand.
Well, I think you definitely have an audience. I mean, folks in our panel, I think just all of the panelists here and the attendees, I want to go to this now that you've described it. It sounds excellent. So thank you for speaking more of that. We'll look out for the online classes.
Okay, well, I'll set something up in the next couple of weeks. I'll give it a try. We'll see what happens.
Brilliant.
Thank you, everybody. I appreciate you.
Thank you. So there's a question here from Penelope. And this is more for Stuart, it looks like, because Penelope's asking, is Jack.org an organization I can refer my young teen granddaughters to for resources? They're 13 and 15, both being homeschooled and seeing friends online only.
Great question, Penelope, and thanks for that. So yeah, you definitely can. Maybe what I'll do is I'll send you my email as well, so we can kind of connect, and I can refer you to their like local chapter and kind of the jack.org groups in their area, depending on where they're located. But I guess just to kind of reiterate too, like jack.org, we ourselves aren't like a service provider, so we're not like providing mental health counseling necessarily, but we're more of like a mental health promotion. So if they're looking to kind of connect with young like-minded young people, and have some people in their community that are able to kind of point them in the right direction and whatnot, then that would definitely be the right place to go. But I will answer your question. I'll type it out as well, and I'll just put my my jack.org email in there, so then you can email me and we can direct your granddaughters to the right place.
Yes, thank you for asking that, and thank you for answering, Stuart. I can say too, I'm still, I guess, a youth, but a little older than your granddaughters. I've actually been volunteering with jack.org this past year, and it's, for me personally, has been a really wonderful way to both learn some more mental health empowerment and education strategies, and keep connected to some really wonderful people, like the folks at the staff, and also the network of young people are just some of the most wonderful, empathic people that you'll ever meet. So I'm glad that you got connected. And now we have a question from Gabrielle. Gabrielle is saying, I'd love to hear more about the concept of radical self-care. This is interesting. This is actually a term that I just heard for the first time a couple of days ago. So I'd love to pass this to any of our panelists if you feel like jumping in and answering that, because I feel like I'm just learning about this concept myself.
I briefly mentioned it. I guess I'll kind of position myself to say I'm not by any means an expert on radical self-care, but I just remember, I can't even remember her name, but it was
Tara Brock. Are you thinking of Tara Brock, Stuart?
Yeah, that might be it. And it was more just, I guess, a general idea that, yeah, like in a world where we're often told not to take care of ourselves, like self-care in itself is an act of resistance and an act of being radical. I don't really know much more, so I don't want to like go down a path to mislead, but that's kind of what I'll share up to this point.
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's really that radical self-care is that assertion that you have the responsibility to take care of yourself first before attempting to take care of others. It's necessary to fill our cup first and then give to others from that overflow. This is what gives us that capacity to heal, to move forward into like a next chapter in our life. Tara Brock, she is a huge advocate of radical self-care. If you look her up on Facebook, you can follow her, and on every Wednesday, she goes on live on Facebook and actually does a mindful meditation, radical self-care session, and it's live and it's so cool. So if anyone wants to join a new community, it is Tara Brock, and she does those sessions live on Facebook. I'm pretty sure Wednesdays at 8 or 6. I feel like it's when I'm eating every time. I'm joking.
Awesome. Thank you so much for going more into detail about that. I appreciate it. I think that the folks listening are also appreciating it as well. I came across kind of when I just heard about the term radical self-care. I was kind of doing some mad Google searching, and I came across a quote from someone, I'm hoping that I'm pronouncing her name correctly, Audrey Lord, and she self-described as a Black lesbian mother, warrior, and poet. Saw some pretty amazing titles, and I think she kind of really hit on what I guess is understanding as radical self-care. And I'll share it here because I think it's really powerful. So she is saying, caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it is self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare. So that's what we've kind of all been using those words tonight, but I really wanted to mention her at some point just because it was many decades ago that she had written this, I think far before it can, like the idea of radical self-care at all really became more mainstreamed. And let me just see the chat. Thank you. Oh, there's one more question. Mandy's asking, can you guys please keep us connected with Leslie? Leslie, you have a huge fan group from this panel. I guess I can hand it over to you. What's the best way to keep in contact, Leslie?
Gosh, I don't know. Facebook. I'm on Facebook, Leslie Mccurdy. You can email me and I'll put you on my mailing list. The easiest way to email me is leslie@lesliemccurdy.ca. I'm in the phone book. So that's actually the easiest way. I still have a landline, so I can be found. But yeah, and I don't know. I think those are probably the best ways to get in touch with me, if you want to. Yeah, because I have a mailing list and I keep people on it and I send it out. And as well, if anything comes up, I'll keep in touch with Haley as well. Let her know. I'm thinking already that maybe to try it next weekend, next Saturday. Just heads up, next Saturday around 3 o'clock. I'm thinking I'll try it. So if anyone wants to send to me, I'll send out a Zoom link, and we'll see what happens. It'll be fun, I hope.
Oh my gosh, that sounds like it'll be a blast. Thank you so much, Leslie, for mentioning that. So looking at the time and looking at our questions, looks like we've covered some of the questions from folks. I'd love to kind of close it out. There was one question that was going to go to Kim, Jenny Lee, and Eric that I think would be a great one to kind of leave folks with today. So I'll pose it now as a way to close out our conversation. And also I'll say to anyone in attendance, if you had any other questions or were looking for kind of more resources or kind of anything else, you can feel free to email me. I will put my email in the chat. And for anything at all, please feel free to reach out. But for now, I'm going to go to this last question, which is again to Kim, Jenny Lee, and Eric. So you covered a lot. I feel like I've learned so much today, and it's been just such a pleasure listening to all of you. And I know for myself, like, I love these conversations. I leave and I feel really rooted and like, okay, I'm going to go out, I'm going to care for myself, and I'm going to do what feels right for me. But it is very often very easy to fall back down the slippery slope of opening social media and being like, ooh, this like shiny version of self-care that may not be good for me looks good. I'm kind of getting taken in by that. So I'd love to pose this to you. How can we try to really build those our own authentic self-care strategies and feel like very rooted in that without maybe being convinced that these idealized strategies are actually where it's at? It's a tricky question, so any insight that you can give would be amazing. I will leave this to you.
I think I'll just, Eric, I'm sorry, I'm gonna go. I'll just say this, Eric, we're gonna hear from Eric. And for me, now, Eric, you just made me think. I forgot what I was about to say. No, just kidding. So you want to just get to know yourself, and it's finding that sweet spot. And I think we have to be intentional and be kind and think moderation. I mean, we all have strategies that we pull on that are helpful, that are unhelpful. We're all imperfect. And I think I'm going to keep going to what Leslie and all of us have continued to say here in this group. We have to just remind ourselves to be kind, to just give ourselves a break, and just finding that sweet spot. So whatever provides you that sense of balance that day, just try to find it. The next day is another day, and be mindful and aware of what Stuart said. What are your warning signs? Well, how do you know that it's starting to get to a point where you need to reach out, ask for help, right? So.
That was very well said. Yeah, I agree. And everything I have to say is basically it's pretty much, you know, what Jenny Lee was saying. Yeah, just focus on the things that bring you joy. You know, pursue things that you're interested in. You know, that will, you know, uh, like I said earlier, that will, you know, keep you in that sweet spot between, you know, being productive and creative. You know, don't be too hard on yourself. You know, everybody's going through this. This is not just something you're going through by yourself. And, you know, reach out to, you know, friends and family, or reach out to those to other resources. If you feel that you need the help, don't take that as a sign of weakness. Take that as a sign of strength, because that just means that you know yourself well enough to know that you couldn't do it alone, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Well, I think that Jenny and Eric have, you know, shared what I would have said. And I think, yeah, it's just knowing what your triggers are and what you can do that brings you that comfort and joy and that balance. And also, too, that, you know, reaching out if and when you do need help, that there are lots of supports available, and you know, they're there to be used, and just encourage people to look if they are struggling.
Well, thank you so much for answering that question. Again, it's not an easy one. I think the journey to really knowing ourselves and being authentic in that it is non-linear and it is ever fluctuating. So I appreciate your words so much. I'm noticing really quickly, I'm noticing one more question, if you don't mind answering. I think this one would be perhaps more, yes, to the artists in the panel. This is being asked by Quentin. Quentin is wondering if you had any thoughts on how or if the role in art has changed in the past year, and what stories our communities need these days. Ooh, that's a really good one to end on. I think we'll leave. Well, I'll send this to Eric and Leslie, and then we will officially wrap up. And thank you so much for everyone's time and for providing these wonderful insights.
I'm gonna let you go first this time, Aaron.
Let's see, has it changed? I think it's changed in the sense that it's become a little more important, or at least a little more recognized as something important, as a way to, you know, to reach out and connect with other people. And I think the stories that are most needed now are ones that, you know, that connect people, that, you know, that give people hope, that give people encouragement. And I think the arts, even though the arts have always been about that, I think in this time particularly, there's a lot more focus on it than ever before. And I'm really happy to see that people are being able to, you know, unify and connect and make those, you know, join the arts community and, you know, bolster it a lot more now that you know, we're all looking for ways to reach out. So yeah, I would say it has changed, but it's definitely changed in a positive way. And art and creative expression has always been a positive thing. So for you know, I'm happy to see that people are being able to use it in that manner.
Yeah, I have to agree. I also think that because people have a little bit more time, more people are becoming involved in the arts, like, because you don't have to be an artist to do art. And so I think a lot more people are trying to do that. Like for instance, I personally started coloring in coloring books at the beginning of this, just to have some focus. And so I think other people are doing those kinds of things, or getting involved in dance classes, or even watching movies and things, whereas before they may not have time, like especially someplace up in Toronto, that 2-hour commute that is not existing is time that people can put towards doing artistic endeavors, even if it's, you know, some people think of cooking as an art. So even if it's doing something like cooking your own meals, you know, and being creative about that. I think people are actually getting more involved personally in doing things that we might call arts, even though they might not consider themselves artists.
Well, thank you for leaving us with that. I think I really like what you said about having more more as much as the reason why we have time, like I'd rather that it be from something that was more globally positive. I think that like everyone does have that creativity, and I know for myself too, like working at the art gallery, I don't have a visual arts background. I was kind of like, oh, I don't know if this is for me, but the arts, it can be a really accessible and exciting and engaging space to be able to really like take some time and learn something new, even if you don't quite know what the end result is going to be. And you don't have to, again, as you said, Leslie, be an artist, quote unquote, to engage in the arts, create something really beautiful and expressive, and find joy. So with that, I'd like to say thank you all so much to our wonderful panelists. I'm going to give all of you a round of applause in my own little house here for being here, sharing your insights. Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who's come out on a Friday night to be with us today. We've loved hearing your questions, your own self-care strategies, and we really hope that you've taken away one thing, maybe a couple things today that you can kind of take with you in your own lives as we all navigate this continually strange time. But just remember, again, as this was said a few times tonight, you know, we're going through this space together, and even though this community, it's not right within our reach, we are all able to still find these spaces that we can connect. So I'm so happy that we've been able to do that this evening, and I'm looking forward to doing that more in the future and welcoming you all back hopefully very soon. So have a wonderful evening and take care, everyone, and stay well. Going to say goodbye to everyone. Bye.